In the cold, misty Highlands of Scotland, a wealthy American millionaire on a soul-searching journey hears a faint cry carried by the wind. A boy, no older than 12, barefoot and bruised, stands among the stones and whispers, "I'm not a slave." That one sentence stops the millionaire in his tracks. What follows is a story of pain, secrets buried in time, and a bond that changes both their lives forever. The wind howled through the Scottish Highlands like a voice grieving the past. Thick gray clouds blanketed the sky, and the damp chill of the moorland seemed to soak into Jacob Monroe's very bones. His black overcoat flapped violently in the wind as he stepped out of the rented Land Rover, parked on the edge of a desolate gravel road that wound through endless hills of green and mist. Jacob wasn't here for a holiday. He wasn't chasing beauty, though there was plenty around him. He had come to forget, to escape the ghosts that had haunted him since the funeral. Just 2 months ago, his wife, Catherine, had died in a freak accident in New York. A slip on a frozen sidewalk, a fall, a brain hemorrhage. Just like that, the love of his life was gone. No warnings, no goodbyes. Just silence and memories. They had been together for 23 years, built a business empire, traveled the world, loved deeply, fought rarely, and now he was alone. And money, for once, couldn't fix a thing. The Highlands had been her favorite dream. She had always wanted to visit Scotland, to see the fog roll over the hills, to feel the age of the land beneath her feet. So Jacob came here, hoping that maybe if he walked the land she longed for, he could feel close to her again. Maybe even find a piece of himself she took with her. He lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in 10 years, and took a long, bitter drag. The wind nearly stole the smoke from his lips. The gravel crunched beneath his leather shoes as he walked away from the car, past a rusted iron gate that leaned into the wind like an old man tired of standing. Beyond the gate, an abandoned estate sat half swallowed by nature. Vines strangled its stone walls. Window frames hung empty like hollow eyes. The air was thick with history, and something else, something heavy, unseen. Jacob paused, looking up at the broken roof of the estate. He felt it again, that strange pressure, like he wasn't alone. Then he heard it, a voice, faint, fragile, carried on the wind like a secret meant to die in silence. "I'm not a slave." Jacob froze. The cigarette fell from his lips, forgotten. He turned slowly, his heart beginning to race. "Hello," he called out, unsure whether he had imagined it. "Is someone there?" Nothing but the wind. He walked cautiously toward the estate, boots sinking into the soft mossy earth. The air grew stiller the closer he got, as if even the wind held its breath. "I'm not a slave." The voice whispered again, clearer this time. A child's voice. A boy's. Jacob's chest tightened. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't grief playing tricks on him. There was someone here. He followed the sound, stepping carefully through a broken doorway into what had once been the grand entry of the estate. Dust and rot filled the air. The beams above creaked like old bones. The silence was absolute. "Hello?" he called again. "You don't have to be afraid. I won't hurt you." No answer. Then, a rustle. From the left. A soft scuffle of bare feet on stone. Jacob turned sharply, peering into a narrow hallway that led toward the back of the estate. The walls here were covered in peeling wallpaper, floral and faded. As he moved forward, he saw what looked like a small shadow dart through an open doorway. He approached slowly, lowering his voice. "I heard you. I just want to help." He stepped into the room. It was what remained of a study, books scattered across the floor, their pages damp and curling from years of moisture. In the far corner, half hidden behind a toppled bookshelf, he saw him. A boy, no older than 12, maybe 13. Dirty blonde hair, wild and tangled. Cheeks hollow, eyes sunken. He wore a thin shirt that was torn at the shoulder and pants that looked like they belonged to someone 3 sizes larger. No shoes. Just bare feet, calloused and scratched. He stared at Jacob like a deer caught in headlights, half ready to run, half frozen in fear. Jacob raised both hands slowly, his voice soft. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. I heard you say something about not being a slave. What did you mean?" The boy flinched, and his lips trembled. "Go away," he whispered. "You're not supposed to be here." Jacob frowned. "What's your name?" No answer. "Where are your parents?" Still nothing. "Are you alone?" The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he shook his head violently. "They'll find me if I talk." Jacob took a careful step closer. "Who will find you?" The boy turned his face away, pressing into the corner like he wished he could disappear into the wall. He said, "I can't leave. I was born here. I belong here." Jacob felt something dark twist in his gut. "What do you mean you belong here? This place is abandoned." The boy turned his eyes back to Jacob, blue, deep, and hollowed by something no child should ever experience. "I'm not a slave," he whispered again, barely audible. "But he said I was." And then he collapsed into silent tears. Jacob's breath caught. He wasn't prepared for this. He had come to escape his own grief, and instead, he had walked straight into someone else's nightmare. Jacob returned the next morning. He hadn't slept a single minute. All night, his mind kept replaying the boy's voice. "I'm not a slave." The way he trembled, the look in his eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. That wasn't just fear. That was survival. He brought food this time. A sandwich, a bottle of water, and a first aid kit. He also wore warmer clothes and boots suited for the muddy Highland paths. He didn't know exactly why he felt so compelled, but he couldn't leave that boy in that crumbling house, not when every instinct in him screamed something was terribly wrong. But the estate was empty when he returned. No footprints. No boy. Just wind and rot and silence. Jacob searched for hours. He shouted. He called the boy's name, even though he didn't know it. He walked the entire perimeter, circled the trees behind the house, and followed a trail of broken branches down a slope. That's when he saw it. A small, moss-covered stone shed built into the hillside, almost invisible unless you were right on top of it. A rusted iron latch held the wooden door shut. He approached cautiously. "Are you in there?" Jacob called. No response. He knocked. Nothing. Just when he turned to walk away, he heard the faintest movement, like someone shifting in the dark. Jacob kneeled and placed the sandwich and water by the door. "I don't know what happened to you," he said gently, "but no one deserves to live like this. I'll leave this here. If you need more, I'll bring it tomorrow." He started to rise when a voice, barely a whisper, came from inside. "You shouldn't keep coming back. He'll see you." Jacob turned. "Who is he?" A pause. Then, "He said I was his. That I was born on the land, so I belong to it. Like cattle." Jacob felt his stomach turn. "That's not true." The boy's voice trembled. "It was always just me and him. He said people forget children like me. That no one cares. That no one would believe me." Jacob sat down on the grass, shocked into silence. "What's your name?" he asked. "Callum." "Callum, I'm Jacob, and I believe you. You don't belong to anyone. You're not a slave. Do you hear me?" Silence. Then the soft sound of quiet weeping from the other side of the door. Jacob stared at the shed as if it were a crime scene, his chest burning with something between anger and heartbreak. Who was this man who had kept Callum hidden like this? How had no one noticed? More importantly, why wasn't anyone doing anything? The village of Innisdale sat quietly in the crook of a valley, nestled between rolling hills and thick stretches of forest. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost picturesque. Stone cottages, small gardens lined with crooked fences, the gentle sound of sheep in the distance. It could have been a postcard from another century. But as Jacob Monroe walked its narrow streets, he felt the weight of something else entirely, an eerie stillness that didn't match the beauty of its surroundings. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from something buried, something deliberately kept hidden. He parked his car by the stone cross in the village square. It was early morning, but already a few locals were outside, tending to gardens, sweeping doorsteps, or just watching. Jacob could feel their eyes on him as he passed, not with curiosity, with suspicion. He had been in small towns before, quiet corners of America where everyone knew everyone, but this was different. There was no welcome here, no curiosity, no smiles, just closed faces and wary eyes. The first place he stopped was the general store, a modest little building with a faded sign and a red door that creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of old wood, tea, and dust. An older man stood behind the counter, restocking shelves with canned soup. "Morning," Jacob said. The man gave a tight nod, then turned back to his work without a word. Jacob hesitated, then stepped closer. "I'm staying near the old Glenford estate. Do you know it?" The man didn't look up. "Not much out that way anymore. I saw someone there." "Hey boy." The man froze mid-reach. Jacob noticed. "I think he's been living there for a while," Jacob continued. "He looks malnourished. Scared. He told me someone said he was on." Now the man turned, slowly. "You didn't see anything. And you didn't hear anything either," he said, voice low. Jacob's brows furrowed. "Excuse me, you're not from here, Mr. Monroe." "Jacob Monroe." "Well, Mr. Monroe, let me give you some advice. We don't like people stirring things up in Innisdale. If you've seen something, it's best to forget it. Drive back to wherever you came from." Jacob stepped forward, anger beginning to stir. A child is living in an abandoned building, terrified, possibly abused, and you're telling me to forget it? The man didn't flinch. "You don't understand how things work here." Jacob shook his head and turned on his heel, storming out of the store. He tried again at the local pub. Inside, it was warm, dimly lit, with the scent of burnt wood lingering in the air. 3 older men sat at a table near the hearth, sipping ale and speaking in low tones. Behind the bar stood a woman in her 50s, sharp-featured and unsmiling. She eyed Jacob as he approached. "You're the American," she said. "I suppose word travels fast," Jacob replied. "Innisdale's not a big place. I need to ask about the Glenford estate," he said, lowering his voice. "And about a boy named Callum." The woman's hands froze mid-clean. "I'm not looking to cause trouble," Jacob added quickly. "But that child needs help." One of the older men at the table stood slowly. He wore a tweed cap and had a limp in his right leg. His voice was gravelly. "There's no Callum." Jacob turned to face him. "I saw him, spoke to him. He's hiding in a stone shed behind the estate." The man shook his head. "You saw a ghost, that's all." "What is it with this place?" Jacob asked, exasperated. "Why is everyone pretending nothing's wrong?" The bartender finally spoke. "Because nothing ever changes, Mr. Monroe. That estate has had its share of darkness for generations. People here learn to look the other way. Are you telling me this boy's been trapped there all his life, and no one did a thing?" The bartender looked at him, eyes filled not with guilt, but fear. "Malcolm Lennox was a madman," she said. "Thought the land belonged to his family by divine right. Thought the people on it did too." Jacob felt a chill rise in his spine. "He never let anyone close," she continued. "Didn't use phones. Didn't go to the village. Didn't take visitors. We used to hear rumors. People said children were heard crying from the hills. But no one ever saw them. No proof. And the one time someone did report him, she looked away. That person moved or disappeared. Jacob leaned on the counter. You can't just ignore this. The old man chuckled bitterly. That's what we've been doing for decades. But Callum's still there. The bartender looked back at him, a flicker of sympathy breaking through. Malcolm's been dead 5 years. But some say others helped him. Groundskeepers. Family friends. The kind of people who believe in old bloodlines and ownership. Some still live in the hills. And if they find you sniffing around, she didn't finish the sentence. Jacob stood silent, absorbing it all. A whole village had chosen silence. Not because they were heartless, but because fear had become tradition. As he walked out of the pub, the wind hit him hard. The gray sky pressed down like a lid, and the cold seemed sharper now, not just in temperature, but in spirit. This village wasn't just keeping secrets. It was built on them. Jacob Monroe sat alone in his rented cottage that evening, staring into the fireplace, the flames dancing like restless ghosts. But no matter how hot the fire burned, he couldn't shake the cold that had settled into his bones since visiting Innisdale. Not just the cold of the Highlands. No, this was something deeper, older. He couldn't stop thinking about Callum, the boy raised in shadows. A child who believed he was owned. Jacob had made billions building systems, order, logic, control, but this was chaos. Madness that had somehow taken root and survived, undisturbed, for generations. How? Why? He knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just about helping Callum anymore. It was about truth. About justice. About peeling back whatever twisted history this village had buried and making damn sure it never happened again. The next morning, Jacob returned to the stone shed. He brought more food, a blanket, a flashlight. But as he approached, he noticed something new. The door was slightly ajar. He froze. Callum? He called gently. No answer. He pushed the door open wider. The inside was dark, damp, cold, but empty. The sandwich he had left yesterday still sat on a rock untouched. Jacob's pulse quickened. Had someone taken the boy? Was he hiding again? Just then, a noise, a twig snapping behind him. Jacob turned fast, but saw nothing. Trees, wind, silence. And then a voice, soft and close. You shouldn't have come back. It was Callum. His pale face peeked from behind a tree, his eyes darting like a hunted animal's. Jacob took a step forward, hands raised. It's okay. I brought food and a flashlight. You can come with me. My car is parked nearby. But Callum shook his head violently. He'll see. They'll know. Who? Jacob asked, keeping his voice calm. Callum, whoever told you that you were owned, they lied. You're a child. You have rights. You don't belong to anyone. Callum looked down at his feet. He had a book. Said it proved I was born into servitude. That it was heritage. Jacob blinked. A book? The boy nodded. Black leather. Gold pages. Said it had the names of everyone his family owned. Said I was the last. Jacob's throat went dry. And where is that book now? Callum hesitated. Still inside. In the big house. Hidden behind the fireplace. That was all Jacob needed to hear. He made a plan right there on the hillside. That evening, as dusk painted the Highlands in long blue shadows, Jacob returned to the abandoned Glenford estate. This time, he came prepared, thick gloves, flashlight, portable heater, and a crowbar. The house groaned as he stepped inside, the wooden floorboards sighing under his weight. The air reeked of damp decay. Cobwebs hung from every corner. A broken chandelier swayed slowly overhead like something breathing. He walked straight to the hearth in the main room, a grand stone fireplace with the Lennox family crest carved into the mantel. A dragon, coiled around a tree. Jacob knelt down and began tapping along the stones, searching for hollow sounds. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, click. One brick shifted. Jacob pulled, and behind it, a compartment opened, a small cavity filled with dust. And inside it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick, black leather-bound ledger. He pulled it out, heart pounding. The book felt wrong the moment he touched it. The kind of wrong that lingers on your skin. He opened it slowly. Page after page, name after name. Handwritten entries with birth dates, parentage, and ownership notations. Whole bloodlines documented like livestock. This wasn't just a family record. It was a catalog of control. The most recent name sent a chill down his spine. Callum Lennox, born on the estate, bound to the land, heirless, property of the bloodline until death. Jacob slammed the book shut, rage boiling in his chest. This wasn't just neglect or cruelty. This was slavery, masked as legacy. As he turned to leave, he heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Jacob's breath caught. He wasn't alone. He backed out of the room, clutching the book. Callum, he called softly. No answer. Then, from the far hall, a shadow moved. A man, tall, thin, face hidden in the dark. But he stood straight, too still to be anything other than watching. Jacob stepped back. The man took one slow step forward. I know who you are, the voice said, deep, gravelly. And I know what you've taken. Jacob tightened his grip on the book. You kept a child prisoner, treated him like property. The man chuckled coldly. That child is property, and you're trespassing. I'll go to the police, Jacob growled. They won't listen, the man said, stepping closer. They never have. This village is built on us, on tradition, on silence. You're not the first to come asking questions, Mr. Monroe, but you can be the first to leave alive. Jacob didn't wait to hear more. He turned and ran. Through the hall, out the broken front doors, down the path toward the trees. Branches slashed at his coat, but he didn't stop. Not until he reached his car and locked the doors behind him, chest heaving, hands trembling. He looked back toward the estate. The man was gone. But Jacob knew this wasn't over. That night, Jacob drove to the nearest city, Inverness. He couldn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his hotel room, staring at the ledger, page by page, taking photos of every entry. He made copies, backups, sent one set to a lawyer friend in London, another to a journalist he trusted. Because this time, the silence would end. And Callum, he wouldn't be a ghost in the Highlands anymore. He'd be free. The rain came hard the next morning, lashing the windows of the Inverness Hotel like angry fists. Jacob sat by the window, the black leather ledger open on the table beside him. The pages, though old, seemed freshly inked, like the names within still whispered from the past, refusing to be silenced. Callum Lennox. Property. Bound. By blood. By land. By lies. Jacob hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that man, tall, shadowy, standing in the hallway of the Glenford estate like a phantom from a darker century. There was something too confident about him. Something that said he wasn't just some trespasser or squatter. He was a keeper, a gatekeeper of a terrible legacy. Jacob's phone buzzed. It was Max Ellison, his attorney and one of the few people Jacob trusted implicitly. I got your photos, Max said without preamble. Jesus, Jacob. What the hell did you walk into? I don't know yet, Jacob replied, rubbing his temples. But I think I'm staring down the remnants of a private slavery ring passed off as aristocratic tradition. Is this even legal history in Scotland? Jacob flipped to the back of the ledger. There are contracts. Actual documents with wax seals. handwritten declarations binding bloodlines to land. It's like something out of medieval England. Max cursed under his breath. You need protection. I'm contacting a journalist. And you need to go to the authorities. Jacob shook his head. Not yet. Not until I get Callum out. A beat of silence. You're serious? Max asked. I'm not leaving him in that village. He trusted me. Another pause. Then be careful. You're not dealing with ordinary criminals. These are people who believe what they're doing is righteous. Jacob ended the call. He stared at Callum's name again. Property of the Lennox line. But who were the Lennoxes really? And who was that man in the estate? Jacob made a plan. That afternoon, he returned to Innisdale, not openly, but under the cover of mist and shadows. He didn't park in the square this time. He left his car behind a dense patch of pine trees and hiked through the forest toward the old church that sat crumbling on the edge of the village. It was abandoned, overgrown with moss and vines. Yet somehow the padlock on the door was new. Too new. He circled the building, heart pounding. At the back, a basement hatch lay hidden beneath dead leaves and thorny branches. It was unlocked. He pulled it open slowly, the old hinges shrieking in protest, and slipped inside. What he saw chilled him to the core. The stone basement was lit with oil lanterns. On the walls were portraits, old paintings of solemn men and women with stern eyes, dressed in 18th and 19th century aristocratic garb. Beneath each portrait was a name and title. Laird Malcolm Lennox, Keeper of Glenford, 1882 to 1920. Eliza Lennox, first mother of binding blood. Benedict Lennox, last holder of the chain. In the center of the room, on a wooden pedestal, was a book different from the ledger he'd found. This one was newer. A registry. Jacob opened it. The first page read, By order of the Old Covenant, the bloodline remains. Bound by inheritance, protected by silence. The names inside were disturbing. Dozens of children, dates of birth, some with check marks. Many with the word retained beside them. Some with removed, and some erased. Jacob felt sick. This wasn't a historical society. It was an active system. A secret family cult enforcing generational servitude under the illusion of tradition. He took photos. Every page. Every symbol. Then he heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Voices. He froze, slipped back into the shadows, and climbed through the hatch, heart racing. He didn't stop until he was deep in the trees again, soaked in sweat and rain. That evening, Jacob went to Callum again. This time, the boy emerged from a nearby thicket before Jacob even called. I saw them, Callum whispered. In the church. Jacob knelt beside him. You've been there? The boy nodded. It's where they bring the new ones. Some didn't come back. Jacob felt fury rise in his throat. Who's the man in the estate? Callum shivered. Gregor Lennox, Malcolm's nephew. After the old man died, he kept the book. Said I was the last pure one. Everyone else ran away or broke the oath. Jacob swallowed. I'm going to get you out of here. Callum's eyes widened. They'll kill you. Jacob looked him squarely in the eyes. Then they'll have to try. The next morning, Jacob met a journalist from Edinburgh, Amelia Byrne, a sharp, fearless investigator with a passion for exposing the elite. He laid everything out, both books, the photos, Callum's words, the hidden church registry. Amelia's eyes grew wider with every detail. This isn't just a story, she murmured. This is a cultural bomb. These people think they're royalty, when in reality, they're criminals hiding behind ceremony. Jacob nodded. We need to move fast. Before they realize we've been inside. Amelia agreed. She sent the files to her team, and she made a call to a contact in Scottish social services. That night, they returned, Jacob, Amelia, and two plainclothes officers in an unmarked car. Their target, the church and the Glenford estate. But when they arrived, it was burning. Flames consumed the old estate, licking up into the night sky, orange against black like hell opening its mouth. "They're erasing everything," Amelia said, horrified. Jacob ran toward the shed, but Callum was already outside, standing in the woods. He stared at the burning house, not with fear, but with freedom. Jacob ran to him, wrapped the boy in his coat. "You're safe now." Callum looked up at him. "No," he said quietly. "We're safe." The flames raged like the voice of history itself, screaming through the charred bones of the Glenford estate. Smoke twisted into the night sky, a thick black column rising over the Highlands, an ancient evil finally burning in the open. Jacob Monroe held Callum tightly as they watched the house collapse inward, flames eating centuries of secrecy. Amelia Byrne stood nearby, recording everything, camera rolling, microphone shaking in her hand from the heat and adrenaline. "What now?" Jacob asked, eyes fixed on the inferno. "The evidence is gone." Amelia shook her head. "Not all of it. We have the photos, the recordings, and we have him." She glanced at Callum. "He's living proof." But Jacob wasn't so sure. The Glenford estate wasn't just a building, it was a monument to silence, to ritual. He knew from the fire's timing that someone had gotten there first. Gregor Lennox, most likely, destroying records before they could be used. A man like him would rather burn down the world than be exposed. The officers who had come with them stood frozen, stunned. None of them had expected this. Rural Scotland had its ghosts, but this was beyond anything they'd seen. Jacob turned to them. "Is there anywhere Callum can go?" "A shelter." The taller of the two, Officer Murray, nodded. "There's a center in Inverness. We'll take him there. He'll be safe for the night." Callum grabbed Jacob's coat. "Don't leave me." Jacob knelt. "You won't be alone. I'll be there first thing in the morning. I promise." It was the first time the boy didn't flinch at a promise. That night, Jacob barely slept. Not from fear, but fury. Fury at a system that had allowed this horror to survive in the shadows. Fury that children had been raised to believe they were less than human. And above all, fury at himself for being part of a world that ignored places like this because they were quiet, remote, and forgotten. He stared at the documents Amelia had managed to upload before the fire. The registry from the church. The ledger from the fireplace. Dozens of names, some old, some recent. Some Jacob suspected were still alive. Children, teenagers, maybe even adults who had been owned, abused, discarded. He couldn't save them all, but he would find every last one. The next morning, Jacob arrived at the Inverness Child Services Center early. It was a cold, gray building tucked between a pharmacy and a bus station, but the staff was kind. A counselor named Ellen led him to a small room with a few chairs, a window, and a blanket on the floor. Callum was curled up on it, asleep. Jacob waited quietly until the boy stirred. When Callum opened his eyes, he didn't panic this time. He just looked at Jacob, confused, but calm. "You came back," he said, his voice still groggy. "I said I would," Jacob replied, sitting on the floor beside him. Callum looked around the room. "Is this a prison?" Jacob shook his head. "No, it's a place for healing." "Why do they care?" Callum asked. "No one ever cared before." Jacob thought for a moment. "Because you matter. Because what happened to you was wrong. And because sometimes it takes one loud truth to break 1,000 years of silence." Callum looked out the window. "What happens now?" Jacob exhaled. "Now, we begin again." Later that day, Amelia's story went live. The Glenford ledger, the Highland bloodline that bound children to servitude, it exploded across social media, and international news outlets like wildfire. Photos of the burned estate, snapshots of the registry, interviews with Jacob, blurred images of Callum, audio recordings of old voices reciting bloodline oaths. People were horrified. The UK government issued a statement. Scottish authorities launched a formal inquiry. And suddenly, the small, quiet village of Innisdale was no longer forgotten. It was ground zero for a scandal centuries in the making. Other victims began stepping forward. A woman in her 30s from a nearby town. A man in his 50s who had escaped in the 1980s. All of them carried the same marks, psychological scars, strange rituals, the belief that their lives were bound by ancestry. It became clear. Glenford wasn't alone. There were whispers of other estates, other guardians, a network of ancient families, using tradition as a veil for oppression. And Jacob? He was no longer just a grieving millionaire. He was the man who cracked open a legacy of chains. But amid the storm of media and legal action, there was one question that haunted Jacob still. Who was Callum, really? He'd only ever given one name, Callum. No last name, no birth record, no hospital trail. And yet the ledger listed him as Callum Lennox, a direct descendant. Was he a victim or something more? One afternoon, while Callum napped in his room at a foster care house arranged by Jacob, Amelia approached with a folder. "You need to see this," she said. Inside were documents, DNA test results, property records, old family trees. It turned out Callum wasn't just some forgotten orphan. He was the last living heir to the Glenford estate through a buried, unacknowledged line. His grandmother had been a Lennox daughter, disowned for marrying a man outside the bloodline. She'd vanished in the 1970s. Callum had been born in secret, raised in silence, and hidden away on the estate grounds when his parents died young. He wasn't just bound by blood. He was the bloodline, legally. Callum owned Glenford now. Jacob sat back, stunned. So all this time, he was being held prisoner on land that belonged to him. Amelia nodded. And Gregor? He knew. That's why he kept him hidden. He needed the boy close to legitimize his control, but hidden enough to silence the truth. Jacob looked out the window, where Callum played in the yard with other children, laughing, finally. This boy, Jacob whispered, was born into ashes. But maybe, just maybe, he's the one who'll light the way. The Highland air was unusually still the day Callum returned to the village, not as a frightened boy hiding in shadows, but as the rightful heir to the land that once imprisoned him. The world had changed around him. Reporters camped outside Inverness. Historians called the Glenford scandal the darkest aristocratic secret in modern Scotland. International human rights groups flooded the region, demanding full investigations into historical bondage masked as bloodline tradition. But in the eye of the storm stood a quiet child with pale skin, tired eyes, and a birthright no one had expected him to carry. Callum Lennox. Legally verified. Genetically proven. The last living heir to the estate. And everything it stood for. Jacob Monroe stood at his side as they stepped past the wrought iron gates of Glenford Manor, what remained of it. The fire had gutted the estate's main hall and west wing. All that was left were blackened beams and broken stone walls. But the front steps still stood, cracked and cold, and in the center courtyard the old Lennox family crest, two lions facing a crown, remained carved into the stone. Callum stared at it. "What does it mean?" he asked quietly. Jacob put a hand on his shoulder. "That your name once meant power. Now it will mean something else." The boy didn't respond, but Jacob saw it, the tension in his jaw, the deep breath he took before stepping onto the cracked family seal. It was like watching someone walk over a grave. Later that day, they met with a legal team from Edinburgh. Amelia joined them, alongside two Scottish government officials. Their purpose was simple: determine what could be done with the land and who had the legal right to speak on behalf of the estate's future. Jacob watched as the lead attorney, a gray-haired man named Pierce MacLeod, spread the surviving documents across the long oak table inside a temporary government tent near the property. "There's no question anymore," Pierce said, tapping the papers. By the 1892 charter, Callum Lennox is entitled to inheritance, governance, and land authority over the Glenford estate and its holdings. That includes over 400 acres of surrounding woodland and several properties tied to the Lennox Trust. Jacob narrowed his eyes. "What about the others? The children who were held here? The ones marked as retained or erased in the book?" Pierce looked uncomfortable. "Technically, none of the victims were legally documented. It's complicated." "Uncomplicated," Jacob snapped. "Callum isn't just a name on a charter. He's a survivor. And that land, it should be used to repair what this family did, not protect it." Callum was silent. Then, slowly, he reached for Jacob's hand. "I want to give it away," he whispered. Everyone turned. Callum continued. "The land, the house, everything. I want it turned into a school. For kids like me. Somewhere safe. Somewhere that never lies." The room fell completely silent. Amelia leaned forward. That's powerful, Callum. But are you sure? You'd be giving away a fortune." Callum looked her dead in the eyes. "Fortunes kept me locked in a shed." News of Callum's decision made international headlines. The heir of Glenford donates estate for orphaned and abused children. From shackles to shelter, a survivor's vision for justice. Jacob Monroe funds Highlands Sanctuary in honor of boy he rescued. It became the most shared story of the year. Donations poured in. Architects volunteered to help rebuild the estate, not as a monument to legacy, but as a sanctuary. Trauma counselors, educators, and legal teams came forward. Within weeks, plans were drafted for what would soon be called the Callum Foundation for Forgotten Children. A school, a shelter, a symbol. But as light returned to the Highlands, the shadows still stirred. One morning, Jacob received a package, no return address. Inside was an old photograph. Two boys standing side by side. One was Callum, younger, thinner. The other, older, bruised. Behind them stood Gregor Lennox, smiling grimly. On the back of the photo, one sentence was scribbled. "One got away. One didn't." Jacob rushed to Callum. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing at the second boy. Callum stared. "That's Jamie," he said, voice trembling. "He was with me for a while. Then they said he got sick. But I heard screams." Jacob's blood ran cold. If Jamie had survived, or worse, if he hadn't, it meant more names, more stories, more pain hidden in these hills. The fight wasn't over. Jacob and Amelia launched a new investigation, one beyond Glenford. They combed through old hospital records, missing child reports, whispered testimonies from the few survivors who came forward. And what they found sent chills through every part of Jacob's soul. There were other estates. Not all as extreme as Glenford, but places where lineage was law, and outsiders were seen as tools, not people. Children raised to serve, women silenced, boys broken in the name of tradition. The Glenford fire had started a chain reaction, a reckoning. And in the middle of it stood a boy who had once whispered, "I'm not a slave," and dared to live like he believed it. One night, as stars scattered above the Highlands, Jacob sat beside Callum on a bench overlooking the rebuilding of the estate. Callum pointed to a tall pine tree being carefully preserved on the edge of the property. "That's where I used to hide when they came looking for me." Jacob smiled softly. "It'll be part of the schoolyard now." Callum nodded. "Good. Kids should know where you can hide." but also where you can come out. Jacob looked at the boy, stronger now, eating well, reading books, even drawing again. "You're changing the world, Callum," he said. Callum leaned on his shoulder. "You changed mine first." The Callum Foundation had become more than a dream. Construction cranes rolled over the Highland hills. New walls rose where old ones had crumbled. The once blackened ruins of Glenford Estate now bore scaffolding, fresh stone, and the faint echo of children's laughter returning to a place that had long forgotten joy. But for Callum, the past had not entirely released him. Even in safety, his nights were restless. Even in warmth, he still awoke shivering. Trauma doesn't fade, it echoes. And no matter how far he walked from that stone shed, its silence often followed him into sleep. One late October evening, Jacob Monroe watched Callum sketch quietly in his room. The boy's fingers moved with careful grace over a blank page. He wasn't drawing monsters. Not anymore. Tonight, it was something different. A circle of children holding hands beneath a tree. Jacob smiled. "That's beautiful." Callum glanced up. "It's us. The ones who made it out." Jacob stepped closer. "You're including Jamie?" Callum paused, then nodded. "I don't know if he's alive, but I want him to be." Jacob sat beside him, wondering how a child who had seen so much darkness could still create hope from it. But that was who Callum was now, not a survivor, but a builder. Still, that lingering question haunted them both. What happened to Jamie? Amelia had continued digging. Her research had uncovered at least 7 other boys who had once stayed at Glenford but were never reported missing. They'd been given no surnames, marked in ledgers as extras, untethered, or, in some cases, just X. She placed the list on Jacob's desk one morning. "Callum might not be the only living heir," she said. "There's a chance others are still out there. Or their families are." Jacob looked at the names, if you could call them that. Boy X1, Boy Y4, Boy Z3. Gregor treated them like inventory. Jacob muttered, "Not children." Amelia nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to humanize them. If even one person recognizes one of these descriptions, we might be able to identify them. Maybe even give their families closure." It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about dignity. Meanwhile, the village of Innisdale was changing too. No longer burdened by silence, the community had begun to open its heart again. The old inn, once fearful of outsiders, now offered free lodging to visitors working with the foundation. Volunteers from all over the UK came in waves. Teachers, doctors, artists. The once withered chapel was being restored to serve as a mental health center. And the villagers who had long avoided eye contact with Callum now nodded at him in the street. A few even smiled. One afternoon, an old woman handed him a bag of warm oatcakes, whispering, "For strength, laddie." Callum's hands trembled as he accepted them. No one had ever given him anything without expecting silence in return. But just as the Highlands began to heal, a message arrived that shook the fragile peace. Jacob received a letter. No envelope. Just a piece of parchment, aged and cracked. Inside, written in careful ink, "Jamie never left Glenford. You didn't search the tunnels. A friend." Jacob's heart stopped. The tunnels. Of course. He had seen mentions of them in the Glenford blueprints. Old servants' passages used during winters and wars. But after the fire, they'd been declared unsafe, sealed without inspection. What if someone never made it out? What if Jamie had been kept below? He grabbed his coat and rushed to find Amelia and Callum. Within hours, a small crew returned to Glenford with lanterns and breathing masks. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden beneath the collapsed west wing, a narrow door, scorched but intact. They pried it open, revealing a steep stone staircase descending into the dark. Jacob insisted on going in first. Callum, against protests, followed. The air inside was thick and metallic. The walls damp, carved with dates and initials. Some newer, some old. After 20 minutes of navigating, they found a side room, locked from the outside. A name had been scratched into the wood. Jamie. Callum froze. Tears brimmed in his eyes. Jacob pulled the door open. The room inside was small. A mattress. Rusted chains. A teddy bear. A torn book. But no Jamie. Only his past. In one corner, someone had scrawled on the wall in charcoal, "Still me. Still not a slave." They didn't find Jamie that night, but they found his memory, his story, and more importantly, evidence that he had lived, not just existed. Amelia photographed everything. The book, the writing, even the symbols carved into the stone that matched Callum's drawings from months before. Later, she revealed something else. A nurse, now retired, had recently come forward after seeing the Glenford story on the news. She recalled treating a malnourished boy named Jamie in the early 2000s, quiet, afraid of the dark, marked with strange burns. She never saw him again. But now, thanks to Callum's drawing and the tunnel discovery, she was sure it was the same child. He had escaped. Somehow, he had escaped. And maybe, just maybe, he was still alive. The echoes of Glenford didn't vanish, but they began to soften. The village held a memorial for the unnamed children who had lived and died in silence. White stones were placed in a garden by the rebuilt chapel, each engraved with a single phrase. No longer forgotten. Callum placed the first one himself. For Jamie. One evening, Jacob and Callum stood on the rooftop terrace of the nearly completed foundation building. The wind swept across the hills, and children's laughter floated up from the courtyard. Callum looked peaceful, more than Jacob had ever seen him. "You okay?" Jacob asked. Callum nodded. "The wind doesn't whisper so loud anymore." Jacob smiled. Callum turned to him. "Do you think Jamie's watching us?" Jacob looked at the stars. "I think he's somewhere safe," he said. "And maybe, one day, he'll come home." Callum smiled faintly, then whispered, "I'll be waiting." The dawn broke over the Highlands with a muted gray light, the kind that seemed to hold its breath before the day truly began. Callum stood by the window of the newly rebuilt foundation building, gazing out at the mist curling over the hills. For the first time in months, the unease in his chest was settling. The foundation was alive with children's laughter and hope. The legacy of Glenford was being rewritten. But sometimes, the past had a way of returning when you least expected it. That morning, Jacob Monroe received an urgent call that sent a ripple of tension through the foundation. A man claiming to be a relative of Gregor Lennox had appeared in Inverness, demanding a meeting. His name was Alistair Lennox, a tall, gaunt figure with eyes as sharp and cold as the granite cliffs that dotted the coastline. Jacob was wary. The Lennox family had been a closed book for decades, and this sudden appearance seemed too calculated to be coincidental. He shared the news with Amelia and Callum, watching closely as Callum's face tightened with a mixture of anger and anxiety. "We need to be careful," Amelia said quietly. "If a family wants something, it's not likely to be good for us." That afternoon, in a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of Inverness, Jacob and Amelia met Alistair Lennox. Alistair spoke with the air of a man used to command. "I've come to reclaim what's rightfully ours," he said, his voice low and cold. "The estate, the lands, the legacy. Glenford belongs to the Lennox bloodline." Jacob met his gaze steadily. "The estate is no longer a symbol of tyranny and pain. It belongs to the foundation now, a place of healing." Alistair scoffed. "A charity for lost children? That's a temporary distraction. The true power lies in blood and title. You may have fooled some, but the law and history are on my side." Callum stood up, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I'm the rightful heir. I don't want your legacy. I want to build something new, something better." Alistair smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can erase centuries of tradition with a school? This family holds secrets that go beyond you or your foundation." Before anyone could respond, Alistair reached into his coat and produced an old, leather-bound book, the Ledger of Glenford. "The ledger is proof," he said, flipping through brittle pages. "It names the true heirs, the laws that govern our land, and it proves that the Foundation's claim is nothing but a folly." Jacob exchanged a glance with Amelia, who quickly took the book and began inspecting it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and cryptic annotations, some of which made reference to laws they had not encountered before. "We'll have this verified by legal experts," Amelia said firmly. "But until then, the Foundation stands as the custodian of Glenford." Alistair's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. Over the next days, tension mounted in the village. Rumors spread that the Lennox family was planning a legal battle to reclaim their estate, and some villagers who had begun to trust the Foundation grew uncertain. Callum felt the weight of it all crushing down on him. He spent long nights poring over old documents, determined to protect what he and Jacob had built. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Callum received a visitor. It was Elspeth, the woman who had once silently watched him from the shadows during his first days in Innisdale. "I've been keeping an eye on things," she said softly. "There's more to the Lennox family than you realize. They've always had enemies within. Your best chance is to find those allies." Callum nodded slowly. "I need to know everything. If the past is going to knock, I want to be ready." Elspeth revealed long-hidden stories of a secret faction within the Lennox family, those who opposed Gregor's cruel reign and sought to dismantle the archaic traditions that bound them. "Not all Lennoxes are the same," she whispered. "Some want change." Meanwhile, Jacob reached out to his network, rallying lawyers, historians, and activists to prepare for the fight ahead. The Foundation became more than a sanctuary. It was now a battleground. Legal experts scrutinized every document, uncovering loopholes and contradictions in the Lennox claims. Historians provided evidence of Gregor's abuses and the illegal methods used to keep children like Callum captive. In a breakthrough, Amelia discovered a notarized will hidden within the archives. A will that named Callum's mother as the rightful inheritor of a portion of the estate before Gregor had erased her existence. This discovery bolstered Callum's claim immensely. One stormy night, Callum sat alone in the Foundation's library, the rain hammering against the windows. He ran his fingers over the pages of the old will, imagining the life his mother had fought for him to have. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Elspeth appeared, holding a thick envelope. "This just arrived," she said, handing it over. Inside was a letter written in careful handwriting. "To Callum Lennox, the truth you seek lies buried deeper than the estate. There are those who want to help you. Trust no one completely, but look for the signs. The past is not dead." Callum's heart pounded. The letter was unsigned, but the message was clear. The fight was far from over, and allies were closer than he thought. The next morning, as the sun pierced through the clouds, Callum and Jacob gathered with Amelia and Elspeth. "We have to prepare for a long battle," Jacob said. "But we're not alone." Callum looked out over the hills, a fierce determination burning in his eyes. "The past may knock," he said, "but I'm not opening that door for fear. I'm opening it to face it." The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, as the sun rose over the Highlands, bathing the rebuilt Glenford estate in golden light. The landscape had transformed. Where once there had been darkness and silence, now stood a vibrant sanctuary, children laughing, learning, and living freely. But the greatest transformation was yet to come. For Callum Lennox, the boy who had whispered, "I'm not a slave," This was not just a place to heal. It was a symbol, a beacon of freedom that needed to stand tall against the shadows of the past. The legal battle with Alistair Lennox and the old guard of the family had reached a critical point. Lawyers argued over documents, wills, and charters. The courtroom was packed, the press eager to witness the fight for Glenford's future. Callum sat beside Jacob and Amelia, steady and resolute. The opposing counsel presented their case with cold precision, attempting to discredit Callum's claim by painting him as a lost child without true lineage. But Amelia's team countered with evidence, the notarized will, testimonies from survivors, and historical records of Gregor Lennox's abuses. As the judge listened, it became clear. This was more than a legal dispute. It was a reckoning with history. Outside the courthouse, the villagers gathered in support. Banners bearing the Callum Foundation's emblem flew proudly. Volunteers and children from the foundation joined hands, a united front that represented hope over oppression. Inside, the judge called for a recess. Callum stepped outside into the cool air, where Jacob awaited him. "You've come so far," Jacob said softly. Callum looked up at the sky. "This is for Jamie. For every child who was trapped here before me," Jacob smiled. "And you're breaking the chains for all of them." Back at Glenford, the foundation prepared for a grand opening, the official launch of the school and sanctuary. Architects and builders worked tirelessly, transforming the estate into a place where children could learn, heal, and grow. Callum was there every day, helping plant trees, arranging books, and welcoming new arrivals. One afternoon, Amelia brought news. "Jamie's been found." The words hung in the air like a miracle. It turned out that Jamie had survived, living quietly in a nearby village under a different name. He was frail but alive, carrying the scars of his past, but free from the chains that once bound him. Callum traveled to meet him, nervous but hopeful. The reunion was quiet. Two boys who had shared the darkest days now sitting together under the Highlands sky. Jamie's voice was barely a whisper. "I thought no one would ever come for me." Callum took his hand. "I'm here now. We're building something better." As the weeks passed, more survivors came forward. The foundation grew into a network of hope and justice. The legal battle ended with a decisive victory for Callum and the foundation. The Lennox family's claim was dismissed, and Glenford was officially transferred to the foundation's care. On the day of the grand opening, the sun shone brightly. The village of Innisdale gathered, villagers and visitors alike, to celebrate a new beginning. Callum stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. "This is more than a school," he said. "It's a promise that no child will ever be treated as property, that the past will not define us, but inspire us to be better." The applause was thunderous. Jacob stood behind him, proud beyond words. That evening, as stars filled the sky, Callum walked the grounds, now alive with laughter and light. He paused by the old pine tree, the place where he once hid. The wind whispered softly. "I'm not a slave," he said aloud. And for the first time, he truly meant it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with your friends and family. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of courage, hope, and resilience. And comment below what part of Callum's journey moved you the most. Your voice can help spread awareness and inspire others. Together, we can break the chains of the past and build a brighter future. Stay connected, and remember, every voice matters.